Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much for joining us again for the second in our series of webinars on proposed headline indicators for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which are organised by the United Nations Environment Programme, World Conservation Monitoring Centre, UNEP-WCMC, and the Secretariat to the Convention on Biological Diversity. My name is Philip Bubb, and I'm going to be the chair for this session. And before we go any further, I just want to quickly give some housekeeping. So we would like to notify you that today's session will be recorded and made available on YouTube. Your microphone will be muted and your camera will be off during the webinar. If you would like to comment, please do that in the chat function throughout the session. If you would like to ask a question to one of the speakers, please do that in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen in Zoom. And if your question is to a particular speaker, please include their name. And we will get back to the questions if there's time during some of the presentations, or if not, at the end of the session. And if you have any technical issues, please send a direct message to technical support Laura Mack via the chat. Next slide, please. So this is the second of 4 webinars on the proposed headline indicators in the first draft of the monitoring framework for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And their aim is to introduce metadata for the headline indicators. Metadata is just data about data, description of the indicators and all the different aspects of them. And so we want to introduce this metadata so that you can understand more the indicators. And the presentations are by the organizations that provide or are developing the proposed headline indicators in the draft monitoring framework. Next slide, please. And so there are 4 webinars. We had the first one last Friday, the next one's tomorrow and Wednesday. And their aim is to help CBD parties and other actors understand the proposed headline indicators. So introduction to what they measure in relation to the goals and targets, their methods and data sources, their potential national level use, their availability, whether they're ready now or some of them are still in development, and for you to meet who produces the indicator. Please note that not all the headline indicators will be presented in this series due to limited availability of speakers in some cases, and also because some indicators are at the conceptual stage still. I would also like to say that these indicators, these webinars are to provide information to help you understand and know the indicators better. They're not part of the negotiation process. And so we're not getting into these discussions about the indicator framework as such and so on, the monitoring framework in these, but we're looking at the individual indicators to understand them better. Next slide, please. And these webinars are part of the process towards the pathway to COP15 later this year. So the first dot on this graphic is where we are now with these presentations and questions and answers on the proposed headline indicators. And with this, UNEP-WCMC has been producing an information document to Substar 24, which will be available very shortly for peer review, where the information on the headline indicators, the metadata, will be presented. And we'll be hearing about that in this session. So that will feed into the discussions on the monitoring framework at Substar 24 shortly. And then also in April, there will be a technical indicator meeting to discuss the suitability and availability of indicators. And from all of that, there will be background papers developed to support CBD COP15 on discussions on the monitoring framework and indicators. Next slide, please. So the information document that UNEP-WCMC is preparing, we should clarify that that document and these webinars that we're presenting now do not provide an analysis of the suitability of the indicators for measuring progress towards the goals and targets. That analysis of suitability will be done later through peer review of the metadata and discussions at Substar 24, and also at this expert meeting being organised next month by UNEP-WCMC with the Secretariat of the CBD and the Biodiversity Indicators Partnership. And then all of that, as I said, will come together in an information document for COP15 for your peer review. Next, please. So our programme for today, we have a 90 minutes webinar, and in a minute I am going to invite the Substar Chair, Ezequiel Benitez, to give us a bit more of an introduction to the draft monitoring framework and the role of the headline indicators. Then we're going to hear from UNEP-WCMC about an overview of the headline indicators metadata and the peer review process for that. And then we will have presentations on each of the 5 indicators listed here. And we'll have then some time at the end, about 15 minutes for questions and answers. Please do post your questions in the webinar Q&A function, and then we'll have a few closing remarks by the Secretariat of the CBD. So next slide, please. And so just to explain a bit how it will work today, so each presentation on headline indicators will be about 6-7 minutes. If there's time, we might take 1 or 2 questions after each one. But please do use the question answer function to ask your questions and make comments. And if you have additional queries after the webinar, you can make them directly to the indicator providers or to the UNEP-WCMC help desk info@bipindicators.net, and we'll facilitate getting that to the indicator providers. And just to remind you that these webinars are being recorded and will be available on YouTube, where there's translation to other languages as well. Next slide, please. So thank you. I would now like to invite Ezequiel Benitez, the chair of Substar, to give us a bit of an introduction to the negotiations on the Global Biodiversity Framework and the draft monitoring framework.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I know that many of you online are familiar with the status of Substar negotiations on the monitoring framework, and thus I will keep to try this very brief. Additionally, as noted by Philip, we're planning this series of technical webinars in order to provide a summary of the specific indicators from a technical perspective. I'll be providing similar remarks in all these webinars, as the participation may change from one workshop to the next. Thus, I apologize in advance. This is the second webinar. For the duplication of information on those of you who are attending multiple webinars. Last February 3rd, we have the first session where we revised goals A, target 4, target 18, and target 19 elements of this framework. Today, as I can see in the program, we'll be dealing with target 7, 16, and 5, so with some examples. These webinars have been organized to support information sharing around the monitoring framework for this post-2020 framework. A draft monitoring framework was prepared prior to part 1 of 24 meeting of Substar as document Substar 24.3.1, and an updated version of this document is currently online as a non-paper for Substar 24.2. This non-paper will serve as the starting point for the negotiations that we will have on the monitoring framework in the upcoming weeks. All of the indicators present in this webinar are currently included as headline indicators in the draft monitoring framework. I've been working with the Secretariat and also with WCMC to ensure that parties have information on technical specificities of existing indicators methodologies. These webinars are presenting indicators which are already at an advanced stage of development. For the indicators that are not at such advanced stage of development, this will need to be developed further if they are maintained in the monitoring framework. But a technical presentation such as the one today is not possible for these indicators. Additionally, the selection of which indicators are being presented on different days has been largely based on the availability of different global experts. I would like to thank all the experts who have agreed to present these indicators. And I apologize to participants that were not able to group the indicators by goal or target due to the availability of experts. In terms of how these webinars relate to the upcoming substance meeting, I will reestablish a contact group on the monitoring framework chaired by Andy Stotts of the UK and Alfred Oteng-Jewab of Ghana. This group will be expected to assess the suitability of specific headline indicators vis-a-vis the post-2020 framework, including the national and global applicability of these indicators. I hope that this webinar will provide information which can inform the discussions in terms of the indicators that are being presented today. I don't want to take too much time, so as I know that we have a very busy agenda today, thank you to WCMC and CBD Secretariat for supporting the development of this webinar, and to all of you for joining us today. Good luck, and thank you again.
Thank you very much, Ezekiel. Next slide, please. So I would now like to invite my UNEP-WCMC colleague, Catherine Moore, to give us an overview of the information document that's being prepared for parties on the metadata for the proposed headline indicators and the peer review process for that. Thank you, Catherine.
Thanks, Philip. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. So I'm going to give a brief overview of the metadata exercise we've been doing for the proposed indicators in the monitoring framework. Next slide, please. So we have been collating data for the headline indicators. We've created a standardized template, which you can see on the right, and we sent this template out to organizations responsible for providing or developing the proposed headline indicators. This template is loosely based on the one done for the SDG indicators, but it's a little bit different. Next slide, please. So the purpose of this exercise was to generate as much information as possible to inform the process to develop the Global Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and to aid the selection of the indicators in this framework. So there is already a proposed selection criteria for indicators, and this was proposed in the two documents on your screen, Substa 24.3 Addendum 1 and Substa 24 Information Document 16. So in this proposed selection criteria, the data and metadata should be publicly available or will be publicly available. The methodology should be published in a peer review academic journal or gone through a scientific peer review process. The indicators will be regularly updated with a lifetime of less than 5 years in between updates. There should be an existing mechanism for maintaining the indicators into the future. For example, be part of the Biodiversity Indicators Partnership. And then specifically for the headline indicators, the proposed selection criteria states that these indicators should constitute one of the main components of national reports and should support national planning processes. These headline indicator methodologies should be agreed by parties and calculated based on national data provided and validated by parties. Next slide, please. So what we've done so far, we've collated all the metadata. So full metadata sheets are provided for 26 of the 39 proposed headline indicators. However, when we were doing this exercise, we found that actually 1/3 of the proposed headline indicators are at either a conceptual stage or a very early stage of development. So for these indicators, there's limited information on who's going to provide the information, how often they will be updated, what the indicator is going to look like. So for these indicators, we've provided a reduced metadata sheet on these tentative proposals, which will provide these to parties. And if we look at the pie chart on the screen, so around 40% in the blue are available for use today. So if these indicators were adopted by the parties, they are ready to go from day one. Around 20% in grey are in development. So we have categorized these as being ready in the next 2 years. So there is development work happening on them. And then the orange, the 30%, this is indicators that need development. So these are the ones that are very conceptual. They won't be ready within the next 2 years. So if we look at the box on the right of the screen, this is just a breakdown of the indicators. You don't need to get too bogged down with the numbers, but I'll just draw your attention to the bottom line. These are the indicators that are in development, needs development even. And you can see that goals D and targets towards the end of the framework, so that's 19, 20 and 21, these all are currently need development and there aren't indicators available. Next slide, please. So we also looked at the scale of the indicators and whether the indicators can be used at the national or global levels. So around 17 indicators are compiled at the global stage, and these indicators can deliver globally relevant data with the possibility of it being disaggregated down to the national level. The middle bar in this bar chart shows the national level indicators. So these are indicators that are produced at the national scale, whether by government agencies or national non-state actors. And then on the right, these are indicators which have a methodology which can be applied at the national level. However, these categories aren't mutually exclusive, and an indicator can be go into each of these 3 different categories. Next slide, please. So we also looked at the use of the proposed indicators for other MEAs and other processes, as this was another part of the selection, the proposed selection criteria. And we found that 18 of the proposed headline indicators are useful measuring progress towards other MEAs and processes. 15 are reported to be adopted for measuring progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. 5 indicators are used in the assessment of IPBES. 2 are cited in the Strategic Plan for Migratory Species under the Convention on Migratory Species. 5 proposed indicators are peer-reviewed by the Biodiversity Indicators Partnership. However, we haven't actually looked at how often the indicators are actually used in these processes and in national reporting. Our colleagues at NatureServe looked at the 5th and 6th national reports and conducted an analysis to see how frequently they were adopted. Next slide, please. So this slide is to draw your attention to things that we haven't done during this assessment. So we haven't done an assessment of the suitability of the proposed indicator as a measure of progress towards the corresponding draft goal or target. We haven't done a deep dive or an analysis on the rationale for the indicator and whether the indicator is a good measure of progress. We haven't looked at the methodology to see if it can be collated. We haven't looked at the data collated. We haven't looked at any specifics on that and how it's done and what capacity there is to do this. And we haven't looked at the suitability, the geographical range, whether parts of the world are better covered than others. And we also haven't looked at the proposed time series. Next slide, please. So in terms of peer review and next steps, so the metadata sheets will be compiled into an information document, which will be available for peer review and made available for the SBSTA 24 meetings. The metadata template itself will also be made available for peer review. The metadata sheets are going to be made available for peer review by the technical expert community, including members of the Biodiversity Indicators Partnership. There will be an expert meeting held in April, and this is co-hosted by the CBD Secretariat and UNEP-WCMC. And this will look on indicators and consider the outcomes of SBSTA and the results of the peer review, specifically looking at the suitability and availability of the indicators. And all of this will be provided in a document, and it will be sent to the COP15 on the findings from this process. Next slide, please. So in terms of resources that are available, as I said, the metadata sheets will be compiled into the information document. But in addition to that, the metadata will be provided on our website. So that's the post-2020 indicators.org. The link is on the screen now. But also see the SBSTA 24 information 16 document. This was a previous analysis we conducted, and this will provide more information about the criteria of indicators and the indicator selection. But if you have any further information and if parties want any more information, please get in touch with us at the info@indicators.net and tell us what information you need and how you'd like to receive it, and we will do our best at providing it for you. Next slide, please. And that's it. Thanks, Philip.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Great. So if you have any questions on this, please do let us know in the Q&A section. And I would now like to pass to the first of our speakers, our presenters. I'd like to ask Thomasina Oldfield, the Director of Programs and Research at Traffic, to give us an overview of the proposed headline indicator, proportion of wildlife that is harvested legally and sustainably. Thank you very much, Thomasina.
Great, thank you, Philip. And thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to speak to people today. I'm Thomasina Oldfield, the Director of Programs and Research at Traffic. And for those of you that don't know Traffic, we're an NGO working globally on trade in wild animals and plants in the context of both biodiversity conservation and sustainable development. Traffic has proposed to co-lead on the development and delivery of a headline indicator for Target 5 on the sustainable use of wild species. Next slide, please. Traffic already has some experience with developing indicators and led on the production of an indicator for biodiversity for food and medicines for the 2010 targets. Next slide, please. The current draft of Target 5 is to ensure that harvesting, trade and use of wild species is sustainable, legal and safe. Next slide, please. It clearly has strong ties with Target 9, looking at the benefits and importance of use, and those are recognised in Target 9. Next slide, please. So the headline for this target had initially been proposed as measuring the proportion of wildlife that is harvested legally and sustainably. There's no current index on sustainable use for terrestrial species globally, although there is a fish stocks index produced by FAO. Currently, this target is framed very positively And you may have read comments back around this target on potentially it needing to align more with the goal A that very much sits under a focus on threats to biodiversity. But with the current wording, we have proposed an indicator on sustainable use of species. This is slightly different to the current proposed wording that is available in documents at the moment. And we feel that although this is positively framed rather than in relation to the threats, it reflects the current draft wording, recognises that sustainable use is one of the 3 pillars of CBD, and it also links to the importance and value of use to people, which is often under-recognised and has that clear link to Target 9. With no current index, Traffic have proposed to work with parties and other relevant experts to develop a framework for a new indicator. We advocate that this should allow for national data collection and national level indicators on sustainable use that can then be aggregated up to regional and global indicators. It would also be designed to disaggregate, for instance, for internationally traded species or by different use types. Next slide, please. As this is a new indicator and we intend for it to be co-developed, rather than talking about what the indicator is now, I'm going to talk a bit about what the steps we think are necessary in order to develop it. So we propose to start by conducting a situation analysis, looking at relevant data sets and previous discussions and proposed indicators, of which there have been many over the years. We would form an expert group with interested CBD parties and experts, and please do contact us if you'd be interested in working with us on this. Our email address is at the end of this PowerPoint. We propose to hold a workshop to discuss initial ideas and gather further ideas and input, and then would propose to pilot the approach to both prove the concept, but also to refine the concept. We think it's very important that the methods developed are published in an academic journal so that the approach receives robust peer review, but also acceptance. As we foresee the parties would be the main data providers, we anticipate needing to develop systems to collect, manage, and process the data, potentially that then can be used to provide national level outputs for the parties themselves. We're fully aware that there will need to be significant outreach with the parties to secure buy-in for a new indicator, but also that really important data provision nationally. We believe that we'll be able to produce a global level indicator in 2026, and then by 2030, a second data point. But depending on data and how easy it is to collect data on a regular basis, we would potentially be looking to provide a data point in between. Next slide, please. As this indicator and ideas are still in development, we're yet to finalise a method for this indicator. So as you can see, there's a lot in development or not yet available on some of the points that the metadata file asked for. And as I've mentioned before, we do foresee national level data and provision, but with global coverage. We'll also draw on other relevant sources that would help augment these data and help with contextualizing. Next slide, please.
Thomasina?
Yep.
I'll just ask you to finish in 2 minutes.
Sure, I'll get there. We intend to have developed the methods by the end of 2023. All this assumes we'll secure the necessary funding for getting this indicator up and running, and we'll need to consider carefully the most efficient way to collect the data, which may or may not be through parties' annual reports. I already mentioned disaggregation, trying to build in ability to look at different cuts and the links to target 9 indicators. It's very relevant to other MEAs and processes, particularly CITES and IPBES, and any follow-ups to the assessment on sustainable use. We won't be able to do this alone. We already have partnerships we intend to capitalise on, particularly the collaborative partnership on sustainable wildlife management that includes CBD, CITES, FAO, IUCN and others, and we welcome interest in involvement in developing this indicator. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide, please. So please do get in touch. My colleague Nastia, who is co-leading on this and is also available today, and I will be at the meetings in Geneva, so it'd be great to meet there to discuss further. Please do email us if you would like to meet up. Many thanks for your time. Thank you.
Many thanks to you, Thomasina. That was on time and very good, very interesting to see how planning a whole indicator development process and framework, I think. Good. I'd now like to invite our next speaker, Ekaterina Polishchuk from UNEP. Ekaterina is going to be introducing 4 indicators which UNEP are leading and supporting the development of. The first of these is this one, Index of Coastal Eutrophication Potential. Before you explain the indicator, Ekaterina, perhaps could you just introduce yourself a little more and the role of UNEP in developing these indicators before you get into the specifics of this indicator? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Philip. Glad to be here together with you. I'm Ekaterina Polishchuk, a statistician from SDG and Environment Statistics Unit, Science Division, UNEP. And my unit is responsible for 25 SDG indicators, which are under UNEP custodianship. So we work a lot with metadata, with methodology, with time series, and so on. Under this project, under this webinar, I will present 4 indicators, which are SDGs indicators. So feel free to contact us if you have any questions. We will be glad to answer. Thank you. And now I would like to start my first presentation, which is on indicator 701. Indicator 701, Index of Coastal Eutrophication Potential, is corresponded to Target 7 of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Reduce pollution from all sources to levels that are not harmful to biodiversity, ecosystem functions, or human health, included by reduction nutrients lost to the environment by at least half, and pesticide by at least 2/3, and eliminating the discharge of plastic waste. Next slide, please. Why is this area important? With over 40% of the human population residing in coastal areas, one of the largest pressure on coastal environment is in eutrophication, resulting primarily from land-based nutrient input from agricultural runoff and domestic wastewater discharge. Coastal eutrophication can lead to serious damage to marine ecosystem, vital sea habitats, and can cause the spread of harmful algae blooms. Next slide, please. Regarding global initiatives, Index of Coastal Eutrophication Potential is used for the monitoring of the Agenda 2030 on sustainable development, in particular Goal 14, Life Below Water. Next slide, please. Methodology for the indicator was published by UNEP in 2021. According to the methodology, 2 levels of indicators are recommended with an optional 3rd level for relevant countries. Level 1 reflects global indicators that are based on globally available data from Earth observations and modeling. Level 2 reflects national indicators that are based on national data, which will be collected from countries through the relevant regional SEAS program. Next slide, please. Level 1 or global indicators are characterized by indicator for coastal eutrophication potential and Chlorophyll-a deviation and Chlorophyll-a anomalies. Level 2 or national indicators include Chlorophyll-a concentration, a national modeling on coastal eutrophication potential, and ensued concentration of nitrogen, phosphate, and silica. Next slide, please. Indicator for coastal eutrophication potential is based on loads and ratio of nitrogen, phosphorus, and silica delivered by rivers to coastal waters. This indicator assumes that excess nitrogen or phosphorus relative to silica will result in increased growth of potentially harmful algae. The basis for those loads is collected from land-based assessment of land use, including fertilizer use, population density, socioeconomic factors, and other contributors to nutrient pollutant runoff. Given the land-based nature of the indicator, it provides a modeled number indicating the risk of coastal eutrophication at a specific river mouth. Next slide, please. Chlorophyll-a deviation is based on satellite assessment of ocean color, and is generated for each individual pixel within a country coastal zone. Results are averaged by months over the time period of 2000-2004. Pixels with differences from the baseline that are in the 9th percentile of values above 0 across the cumulative global exclusive economic zone and or territorial waters. As the percentage of pixels in a country EEZ that are identified as deviating from the baseline is calculated for each national EEZ by month. The annual average of those monthly values is then calculated. Next slide, please. Chlorophyll-a anomaly is also based on satellite assessment of ocean color and generated for each individual pixel within a country's coastal zone. Pixels are classified and counted as moderate, high, or extreme anomalies. The number of days a given pixel is classified as moderate, high, or extreme within each month is divided to the number of days in each month where the pixel has valid data. The monthly statistics are reported on an annual basis by taking an average of the country's 12 monthly frequency values for the calendar year for each EEZ. Next slide, please. Currently, the data is available for Chlorophyll-a deviation and Chlorophyll-a anomaly. Data on Chlorophyll-a deviation is available for 2000-2019 in global, regional, and national scales. Data for 2020-2021 will be published in a month. Data on Chlorophyll-a anomaly is available for 2018-2020, also in global, regional, and national scales. Data for 2021 will be published in a month. For ICEP, final reporting will initiate in 2024. National data collection through the regional SEAS already exists for some regional SEAS. This data will be compiled for SDG reporting in 2022. Next slide, please. All available data can be found in the SDG Global database. Next slide, please. Thank you for your attention. Now I can move on. move to other indicator. Yeah, thank you. Next slide, please. Indicator 702, plastic debris density, is also corresponded to target 7 of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Next slide, please. Humanity has long used the ocean to dispose of goods and materials regarded as waste, either directly or indirectly. Since the 1950s, when large-scale production of plastic began, an increasing population a proportion of solid waste in the ocean has consisted of this material, representing up to 80% of marine litter. Plastic litter is most obvious of shorelines, where litter accumulates due to current, wave, and wind action, river outflows, and by direct littering at the coast. However, plastic litter occurs on the ocean surface, suspended in the water column, on the seabed, and in association with biota. Next slide, please. Regarding the global initiatives, plastic debris density indicator is used for the monitoring of the Agenda 2030 on Sustainable Development, in particular, Goal 14, Life Below Water. Next slide, please. The methodology for the indicator was published by UNEP in 2019 and 2021. Guidance for the monitoring and assessment of plastic litter in the ocean is a quite technical document, whereas a global manual on measuring SDG 14.11, SDG 14.21, and SDG 14.51 gives a general overview. According to the methodology, 2 levels of indicators are recommended with an optional source level for relevant countries. Level 1 reflects global indicators that are based on globally available data from Earth observation and modeling. Level 2 reflects national indicators that are based on national data, which will be collected from countries through the relevant regional seed program. Next slide, please. Level 1 or global indicators are characterized by plastic purchase greater than 10 meters and beach litter originating from national land-based sources. Level 2 or national indicators include beach litter, floating plastic, water column plastics, and seafloor litter. Next slide, please. For level 1 indicator, beach litter originating from national land-based sources, UNEP, with support of Florida State University, has produced a global model of marine litter using ocean parcels 2.0, a state-of-the-art Lagrangian ocean analysis framework to create customizable practical tracking simulation using outputs from ocean circulation models. This model was used to estimate where plastic that would be found on the coast likely originated from. As an example, for Kenya, based on this model of the plastic which ends up on Kenyan's beaches, 11% likely originated from Kenya, 60% likely came from countries in Africa, and 29% likely came from outside the region. Next slide, please. For level 1 indicator plastic purchase greater than 10 meters, global data product based on satellite data will be used. Multi-spectral satellite remote sensing of plastic in the water column is currently only possible for large elements, more than 10 meters, and under good atmospheric conditions. Next slide, please. Regarding level 2 indicators, beach litter, plastic in the sea column, and floating plastic and plastic on the sea floor, beach litter is most available type of data at the national level. National efforts to collect data on beach litter can be supported by campaigns to engage members of the public as volunteers in beach cleanups or citizen science programs. A geospatial model is recommended in order to estimate the density across the coastline and to establish a national average. Next slide, please. Currently, the data is available for beach litter per square kilometer based on citizen science data and beach litter originating from national land-based sources based on modeling data. Data on beach litter per square kilometer is already published and available for 2015-2020 in global, regional, and national scales. Data on beach litter originating from national land-based sources is available for 2017-2021 in global, regional, and national scales and will be published in 2022. Data on plastic perches greater than 10 meters is under development. National data collections through the regional seas already exist for some regional seas. With this data will be compiled for SDG reporting in 2022. Next slide, please. All available data can be found in the SDG global database. Next slide, please. Thank you. And now I would like to move to the sort indicator. Thank you. Next slide, please. Indicator 1601, Food Waste Index, is corresponded to Target 16 of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Ensures that people are encouraged and enabled to make responsible choices and have access to relevant information alternatives, taking into account cultural preferences to reduce by at least half the waste and, where relevant, the overconsumption of food and other materials. Next slide, please. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, approximately 1/3 of all food is lost or wasted. This results in economic loss and increased pressure on food systems. Reducing food waste is critical to maximizing the value of agricultural land and ensuring that nature resources are used in a sustainable way. This indicator will be only help countries identify where food is wasted, but also it can provide information which governments, citizens, and the private sector can take in order to reduce food waste. Next slide, please. Regarding global initiatives, Food Waste Index is used for the monitoring of the Agenda 2030 on sustainable development, in particular Goal 12, responsible consumption and production. Next slide, please. The methodology for the indicator was published by UNEP in 2021. Global Chemical and Waste Indicator Review document gives a general overview. Whereas the Food Waste Index report is a more detailed document and contains country data. According to the methodology, 2 levels of indicators are recommended with an optional source level. Level 1 reflects global indicators that are based on globally available data from modeling. Level 2 reflects national indicators that are based on national data, which will be collected from countries. Next slide, please. Level 1 indicator is characterized by food waste estimates for each sector, such as manufacturing, retail, food service, and households. Level 2 indicators is characterized by food waste generation tracked at a national level. Level 3 indicators include additional information and disaggregation of food waste data by destination as well as edible and inedible parts. Next slide, please. For level 1, the global modeling approach estimates proportion of food in the total waste stream data, for example, municipal solid waste, and applies the population to the total. Important to note that when a country reports data, then no global estimation will be done. The country data will be used directly. Next slide, please. For level 2 indicators, countries should identify the scope of which stages of the supply chain can be covered and estimate the total amount of food waste for each supply chain stream. Total food waste is a sum of food waste generated in households, food waste generated in restaurants and other food services, as well as food waste generated in retail. The amount of food waste within a stage of the food supply chain shall be established by measuring food waste generated by a sample of food businesses, operators, or households. The food waste index is calculated as a ratio of the amount of food waste per capita in the analyzed year to the amount of food waste per capita in the base year, multiplied by 100. Next slide, please. On this slide, you can see recommended methods of a measurement of food waste for each stage of food supply chain. So different countries use different methods for this estimation. Next slide, please. Currently, the data is available for level 1 indicators, food waste in tons and food waste per capita in kilograms. The first reporting cycle was in 2021. Data is available for 2019 in global, regional, and national scales. For level 2 indicators or national data, the final reporting is planning in 2023. National data collection is planned to be organized through the UNSD UNEP questionnaire on environment statistics waste section. Next slide, please. As I already mentioned, all available data can be found in the SDG global database. Next slide, please. Thank you again. And now I would like to move to my last presentation. Next slide, please. Indicator 1602, material footprint per capita, is also corresponded to target 16 of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Next slide, please. It has been clearly stated that indicators of direct material flows, such as the domestic material consumption, don't account for all global material flows related to final consumption in a country or region, as indirect materials of imported and exported products are not considered. Hence, indicators of direct material flows cannot account for the actual environmental consequences generated to the consumption of certain products, as material flows can be located in other world regions. Assessing global material use related to final consumption require other indicators based on material flow accounts, such as material footprint. Thus, domestic material consumption reports the actual amount of material in the economy, while material footprint, the virtual amount required across the whole supply chain to service final demand. Next slide, please. Regarding global initiatives, material footprint per capita is used for the monitoring of the Agenda 2030 on Sustainable Development, in particular Goal 8, decent work and economic growth, and Goal 12, responsible consumption and production. Next slide, please. Material footprint is the attribution of global material extraction to domestic final demand of a country. The total material footprint is the sum of the material footprint for biomass, fossil fuels, metal ores, and non-metal ores. It's calculated as domestic extraction plus raw material equivalent of imports minus raw material equivalent of exports. For the attribution of the primary material needs of final demand, a global multi-regional input-output framework is employed. Next slide, please. The methodology for the indicator was developed and published by UNEP in 2021. Next slide, please. The current slide shows the data collection process for the indicator. Thus, UNEP International Resource Panel provides estimation of material footprint and domestic material consumption for all countries. This estimation is based on the methodology mentioned above, using data from national and international data sources, such as UNSD, FAO-Stat, and other databases. After that, UNEP communicates with countries and sends them a pre-filled questionnaire for review or replace the data with national data if possible. Countries review, replace the data with national data if possible, and send the feedback to UNEP. UNEP, in a collaboration with UNEP IRP, analyze the replaced data and prepare it for publishing in various platforms, such as UNEP World Environment Station Room, SDG Global Database, and others. Next slide, please. All data is available. You can find time series for material footprint by type of raw materials in tons, material footprint per capita by type of raw material in tons, and material footprint per unit of GDP by type of raw material. The first reporting cycle was in 2021. Data is available for 2000-2017 in global, regional, and national scales. Data for 2018-2019 is also being developed and will be published quite soon in 2022. Next slide, please. As I already mentioned several times, all available data can be found in the SDG Global Database. Next slide. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, you can contact our unit directly, or, for example, using my email address. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ekaterina, for your very clear presentation on all of the 4 indicators. Yeah, there's a lot of information to cover there. You did a very good job. So we actually we're a bit ahead of time of what we had thought for the schedule. So we're doing very well for time for questions and answers. Please do put your questions. Okay, here we go. I'm going to go a couple of questions here. First, a question for Ekaterina from on the food waste methodology. Whether you could explain, Ekaterina, whether it is following the SDG 12.3 methodology, and if not, then why?
Yes, this methodology is agreed with SDG methodology for indicator 12.3.1b, because if you're familiar with SDG indicators, you know that indicator 12.3.1 includes 2 sub-indicators. One is about food loss, and Food and Agriculture Organization is responsible for this indicator. And another one, which is 12.3.1b, is food waste, and UNEP is custodian organization for this indicator. And yes, this methodology is the same.
Thank you. A question for Thomasina. Thanks for your excellent presentation. You mentioned that traffic is the co-lead on the wildlife trade indicator. So who else are you leading with on that?
So we are proposing to lead with other organisations. It was all quite a rush to get the metadata submitted before Christmas, and we're hoping to develop this with others. We certainly need to bring in expertise and brain power of a number of organisations and experts. So hence me saying co-lead. I feel maybe we should be saying, you know, driving force rather than leader, but we've already been talking to various different organisations, and we'll be reaching out to parties to discuss with them next week at the CBD meetings. We've had some discussions. We've reached out to Mexico and also to Georgia and also to the UK, but no one, I think, it would be difficult to say we're co-leading specifically with people at the moment, but we also have been discussing with IUCN and BirdLife, WCMC, and the other partners in the collaborative partnership on wildlife, sustainable wildlife management. So hoping that we formally get people kind of signed up to co-lead in the coming weeks.
Good. I don't see any more questions specifically to the speakers at this point, but please do let us put them in. Can I ask a question to Thomasina about, yeah, so as you said, the name of the indicators changed compared to what was originally put in there. Like, it originally was proportion of wildlife that is harvested legally and sustainably, and you're now proposing something more around the subject of sustainable use of wild species. So like the purpose of the indicator is you're seeking to clarify that, I think, and that is also in relation to the negotiations about the goals and targets. And so obviously an indicator ideally is designed to help measure progress to a goal and target, but your goal and target may be shifting. So could you say a little bit about how you would like to sort of see that process work of developing an indicator whilst also the goal and target is shifting, and in informing both of those sort of processes?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm hoping that there is going to be some clarity in the not too distant future on the exact wording of the target. And I think that given we are, still at the development stage, we can also adapt to ensure that any indicator speaks to the ultimate wording of the target. I think the originally suggested wording, proportion of wildlife that is harvested sustainably and legally, there were two elements of the target there, and it left out the health element as well. So I think because there was no indicator, it was easy to kind of suggest something that seemed to be potentially measurable. And I think when we've been discussing it, we felt that maybe a more appropriate focus would be on the sustainable use aspect of it, which I think is pretty much similar to, well, it's not quite similar, but it's along the lines of wildlife that is harvested sustainably, not necessarily the proportion, because you may want to look at it by species rather than by, you could be looking at, say, fisheries or wild meat, etc. And then you're looking at I'm probably going into far too much detail here, so I'm going to wind back. But I'd say we can, depending on the ultimate wording of the target, we can, adjust to make sure that's reflected. I think that there are other elements that we still need to be thinking about, which may have to be more component indicators rather than a headline indicator. So those elements on legality and health, which are clearly very important, but need to be thought through. So I've waffled on, Philip, and probably not answered your exact question.
That's good. All right, I can see Ezekiel has got his hand up. Would you like to ask a question?
Thank you very much. Yes, a couple of questions, one for Thomasina and Ekaterina. Certainly on sustainable use, I see that it's good to have positive language, because we shouldn't be only referring to causes of biodiversity loss, but how to promote ecosystem functioning and wealthy populations through sustainable management, and also benefits for communities. And CITES has been working for a number of years on what is called non-determined findings. It requires basic information to ensure safe quotas of harvesting for timber, non-timber, wildlife in general, and those are very important elements that should be taken into account on indicators. And I hope these discussions can be in substance being taken into account rather than the process to develop it. We need to have more elements ready on discussions, as well as moving now to Ekaterina, the information on eutrophication. Chlorophyll has been used for remote sensing for a number of years, at least in my country, and I think this is a very useful tool with great potential to be established probably as a element in headline indicator. So I believe we should work more on this, and I would love to see this during discussions in the next weeks in substance. Thank you very much.
Yes, Thomasina.
I'd like to respond to Hezekiah's point on CITES and non-detriment findings, and I think what's going to be key about this indicator, and particularly about the need for national level data collection and provision, is that something is designed that actually is going to help inform management systems within countries as well. So I think that linking into that non-detriment finding process is also going to be really useful and helpful, but also important that this isn't just an indicator. It's actually going to be a helpful process in providing information to move forward with sustainable management.
Thank you, Thomasina. Ekaterina, would you like to respond to any of Ezekiel's comments?
Yes, I would like, about how to promote. And I would like to answer to this question from user side. Usually at the national level, when ministries or different government organizations see new indicators, they have a lot of questions, because they need to understand what international organizations would like to get, what is the reason, and how this indicator can be used, and so on. So for sure, I would like to, to raise a point about capacity building. We need to work with our countries closer. Just for example, using workshops, online courses, develop methodology and metadata, and promote these indicators using this area. And I think in this case we will be closer, because sometime our goals and targets are very high and quite important, but not very understandable for many countries. So yes, one more advice, we need to think about capacity development more. This is all.
Thank you, Katerina. Yes, we fully agree. Kind of taking that subject a little further on capacity development, we've heard today your presentations on the indicators, and actually quite quickly each indicator becomes quite technical. There are very specific terms to understand and concepts about the specific subject to be able to understand what the indicator is measuring and why. And so it quickly becomes a challenge to perhaps explain to non-experts what the indicator is trying to measure and why it's done in this way and its strengths and weaknesses. And this is perhaps a challenge which we're trying to help a little bit with in these webinars, is to introduce these indicators, but there's a more continuous process for the discussions that are going on now in the CBD process with Substar and the COP and so on, to help people understand the indicators and the subjects that they're dealing with and the specific measurements. So we're trying to contribute to that with these webinars and information documents and other things, but I wonder whether you have any thoughts about how to better kind of help, if you like, develop the capacity of people in negotiations to understand these subjects and the proposed indicators and what's involved.
Yes, I can answer. And to be honest, I have a lot of thoughts how to answer your question. And maybe I will start from the example. I was talking about indicator 1602, which is about material footprint per capita. This indicator is quite complicated, but extremely important and very interesting. And for example, just now, UNEP is working with data and with countries for this indicator. We already received data from International Resource Panel for all countries, and we already developed a questionnaire for which we are going to send as a pre-filled questionnaire to countries. And in the end of this questionnaire, we added few questions about if country would like to, know more about this indicator and about this methodology. And if we get positive response from any country, we are going to send them, as an additional questionnaire, but not a questionnaire, but a compiler for this indicator as an exercise about this indicator. And country will be able to, to fill this compiler with some explanation. And if country has any questions, country can ask us, and we will continue work with them. As a one of examples, how we try to manage these difficult indicators. In general, we already developed several online courses. They're general about environmental statistics and about different SDGs, environmental SDGs. And each of these online courses include some explanation about each indicator. So anyone just can find this online course. I recommend you to go to weather.unep.org, or maybe I will, I will post a link where users can find some information about these online courses. And yes, they will be able to get more information about these indicators and how these indicators can be used. And for sure, we have several projects for some countries and regions, and we're really open. And if any of countries has any questions, usually we try to answer quite quickly. And we get these questions from different countries. And again, even about capacity development, it's quite important. If any of you needs capacity development regarding any of indicators I already mentioned, please contact us and we will know. And yes, we will add you to our list just for our next steps. This is all.
Great, thanks, Ekaterina. Yes, please, Thomasina.
Thanks, Philip. Yes, I think just to really echo what Ekaterina said, we would anticipate direct contact and outreach and capacity building where possible and within available resources to help ensure that there's understanding of the indicator, understanding of what we'd be looking to for data collection. But as Ekaterina's also said, they've developed online courses. We've actually just launched an online course on making non-detriment findings, and actually I think we've all learned over the last couple of years of working from home how useful that kind of online course can be, so that people can take things in their own time and they can go back and relook at things. So I think that would be something that would be an important element to that outreach and to the engagement with with as many parties as would be possible. Thanks.
Thank you. Good. I'm going to take just about 5 more minutes of kind of questions and answers, and then we have with us one of the co-chairs from the open-ended working group on the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, Basil van Harderen. So I'm going to ask Basil to give some closing remarks from about 20 past. I haven't seen any more questions as such coming through. I wondered though whether something that struck me from today's presentations is, first for the UNEP supported indicators, they're all Sustainable Development Goal indicators. They're very much tied into that, and the CBD process is benefiting in many ways from having the existing development and profile of Sustainable Development Goal indicators. And also with traffic, as you just said, you're working very much with CITES and other processes, building that sort of body of work and network and capacity into also supporting the CBD process. I see, my question is, can you see further value or lessons for the development of indicators in this way, where we're working across processes to support the CBD monitoring framework? Thomasina?
I think that wherever possible, efforts to collect data that can speak to different targets is going to be vital. We spend a huge amount of time and effort in collecting data and all that goes with that, and for things to be able to speak to different targets, different processes is really important. At the same time, one of the reasons that we felt it was important to be developing something potentially new is that in the past we've relied on a lot of the same data sets cut in different ways, and actually if you continue to do that, we'll never actually collect the data and look at the sources that really speak directly to some of these indicators. So, I think it's a balance. I think, we've got to balance collecting information with, actually going out and saving the world. But I do think, where data can be used for multiple uses, I think that's vitally important. And I look forward to speaking to some of the other indicator leads, I think particularly, and I think Julian Chow is on the line at the moment. Looking forward to speaking to him about the Target 9 indicators. So hopefully there's something we could, think about together on that. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Thomasina. Katerina, would you like to speak on taking
Yeah, I would
with that? Yeah.
would like to support previous speakers, and would like to mention one more point about burdens for users. And I think that this is very important to use, already developed frameworks, because really we try to, to achieve our best, but for sure we need to be realistic and practical as well. Because today, countries have a really huge pressure from different sides, as a inside and outside. And I think this is very important to remember that a lot of good, useful frameworks are already developed, and if we can use something from them, it's extremely important and helpful. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you very much. Good. So now I'd like to invite Basil van Havre to give us some concluding remarks on today's indicators and discussion.
Thank you, Philip, and good day to all of you. I hope you can hear me well. I'm not using my usual headphones.
Okay.
Again, this is a very useful discussion. I will make my best to try to participate in all of them. Sometimes it's a bit challenging as we're getting close to the meeting. I just want to reinforce a couple message. One on being practical, and sometimes the best is the enemy of the good, and I'm wondering whether there is a way to have some short-term measures or short-term indicators that are ready, available, and could be put in place immediately, while in parallel developing a better solution. The second message is about something that Katerina just said, and it's about keeping in mind the need to be cognizant of the resource available and be simple and nimble. It is easy for any of us with an interest in a particular area to devise the very precise indicators, but sometimes we got to keep in mind that we're asking people to provide all kind of data, so it can be daunting. So let's keep that in mind, and let's try to minimize the burden. Thirdly, I was very interested, and Zekio and I were chatting back and forth about some of the indicators, and on the chlorophyll side, but also on the illegal trade. There is a lot of very valuable work done in many places on the efficiency and effectiveness of measures species by species. What I'm not aware of, and that it may be because it exists and I've not paid enough attention, is an aggregate of all those individual species measures. So that is something that I've been discussing with our colleagues in CITES, and maybe we want to have a look, but how beyond the species that are considered by NDFs, how do we have an idea of the difference this system is making? And that is a question I'll leave with you. So colleagues, those are the few points I wanted to leave with you. Very, very interesting discussion. I wish again that we had more time, but perhaps that will be possible in the future. And definitely I've learned a lot and appreciate, and I'm thankful for that. Back to you, Philippe.
Thank you, Basil. We have a few more minutes still. If I don't know, Ezekiel, would you like to add anything from today?
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to see these exchanges of views and looking for ways to get into more details on the different indicators, the availability of global information and the importance to scale to national level and how this can move up and down, since part of the core of the monitoring framework will be based on headline indicators, and that this, in the best scenario, can be part of national reports. It is very important to have clarity, to know what we have available, what do we need to plug into the systems, and to provide information and to get information from different sources. And at least the set of indicators we saw today are key for the framework. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ezekiel. Well, I think we've got 5 minutes left, but if there's anything else that Thomasina or Katerina would like to add, no, okay, I think we can finish 5 minutes early then. And thank you very much indeed to presenters and my UNEP-WCMC colleagues, and to the Secretariat and CBD, and to Ezekiel and to Basil for very useful information and views presented today. And we look forward to doing it all again tomorrow and on Wednesday for further indicators. So we hope to see you then. Thank you very much, everybody. Stay safe and goodbye.